Gutting Gossip: How to Kill the Poison Grapevine Before It Spreads. I'm Mike Zigarelli. Hang around people for even a short period of time, and you're almost guaranteed to be exposed to gossip. People seem to talk about each other a lot. Typical evidence of this comes from the American Society for Training and Development, which found in a large national survey that 64% of people say that they gossip at work sometimes, while more than 1 in 5 admits to being a frequent participant in workplace gossip. But should this be of any concern to us as Christians? Do we have a responsibility to avoid or even restrain such behavior? And even if we do, what could we possibly do when the poison grapevine begins to grow out of control? To answer these questions, let's begin with a basic understanding of what we mean by gossip. It's simply discrediting talk about someone who's not part of the conversation. Anything that may harm someone's reputation or cast them in a bad light might qualify, depending on our reason for sharing that information. There will be legitimate reasons sometimes, especially when the goal of sharing the information is to improve the situation or to help someone in need. But oftentimes, the discrediting talk serves more nefarious purposes, which is when it crosses the line. One obvious situation is when we're seeking revenge. We may feel wronged by what someone has done, but rather than directly communicate to that person, we elect to malign him or her by simply gossiping to others. This is a clear case of doing something we shouldn't be doing. Another time we cross the line from legitimate communication to gossip is more subtle. When our motivation is to knock someone down a few notches so we can elevate our own reputation. That is, we can enhance our image at the expense of someone else's. And in many cases, we don't even consciously realize that this is why we're gossiping. But think about it. If deep down the reason we're criticizing someone's wardrobe is to implicitly highlight our own, that's gossip, harming someone else's reputation for no faithful purpose. Here's a third motivation for gossip. And this one too seems innocuous. People gossip because it bonds them together with other people in the conversation. Talking down about someone we all agree is just not living up to our standards brings people in the conversation closer together. In fact, this may be the primary reason we gossip so much at work and at school and at church and on the ball field and at family gatherings and everywhere else. Everyone wants to get along with the people right in front of them. And what easier way than making fun of a common foe? Gossip, then, clearly is not something in which we Christians should engage, because when we do, we score big on the sinfulness index. Slander and pride in one brief conversation, and perhaps a little vengeance or even envy thrown in for good measure. In fact, Scripture speaks explicitly and unequivocally to this issue. The Apostle Paul put gossip alongside some pretty extreme company. To the Romans, he said that some of them have become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They're gossips, slanderers, God-haters, insolent, arrogant, and boastful. And to the Corinthians, he wrote, I fear that when I see you, there may be quarreling, jealousy, outbursts of anger, factions, slander, gossip, arrogance, and disorder. Gossip? Alongside things like greed, depravity, murder, jealousy, and God-hating? In our present-day context, it seems terribly misplaced. Even if we do think of gossip as a sin, it's a tepid one at worst. But it's not to God. It's no accident that his inspired messenger to the Gentiles included gossip among these flagrant transgressions. From God's perspective, gossip is a venomous misuse of the tongue, an outgrowth of things like arrogance, jealousy, and insolence. And it culminates in strife, which grieves God. One of his children is maligning another. So, since we do indeed have this responsibility to avoid gossip, what are we to do when we encounter it? Just walk away? We can actually do better than this. Much better. Sociologists, psychologists, and anthropologists have conducted a substantial amount of gossip research, and some of it reveals how to effectively cut it off. For example, in one classic study, researchers at the University of Indiana found that when someone in a group conversation expresses a negative opinion about an individual who's not present, that is, when the gossiping first begins, the first response to this opinion from a member of the group will often determine whether more gossiping will occur in that conversation. More specifically, If the first response to this negative comment supports the comment, then the gossiping tends to spiral. Other people in the conversation consider it safe to agree and unsafe to disagree with the opinion, and it typically becomes open season on the target of the gossip. However, and this is where you can come in, if the first response to the negative comment is a challenge to it, that is, if someone immediately disagrees with or questions the assessment before anyone else endorses it, then the conversation is much less likely to become a gossip fest. Often the initial speaker responds by moderating or even retracting the opinion, and the conversation goes in any number of directions. People in the conversation feel free to either agree or disagree with the initial evaluation because they know they will not stand alone. This conclusion, it seems, makes intuitive sense. We've all been in these kinds of conversations, and we've seen them either intensify or wither based on the first response. Beyond that, this is valuable information for Christians because it demonstrates how we can put some reins on gossip. Anytime that gossip rears its ugly head, we can immediately but gently challenge it. We should be prepared to respond with a counter-opinion, or at least raise some doubt before the comment is ever endorsed. It's important to get in first. And in those cases where we actually agree with the negative assessment, rather than joining in or even remaining silent, we can perhaps look for a creative way to quickly steer the conversation elsewhere. In other words, when you agree with the gossiper, neither endorse nor denounce the negative opinion, but instead try to tactfully change the subject. You'll no doubt have ample opportunity to try this technique, so experiment with it. Learn how to diplomatically extinguish gossip as soon as it begins. Once you make this a habit, you'll not only find yourself participating in much less gossip, you'll also likely reduce conflicts in your workplace, your school, your family, your church, and anywhere else God has called you to represent Jesus Christ.